Okay, this is E1-Economic Principles. For more information, check out any Principles of Economics textbook. Chapter 1 would usually have this type of information in it. Any year, really. I like Krugman's Principles textbook, and I also like Gregory Mankew's Principles textbook. If you remember, Krugman is the New York Times columnist known for his liberal views. Mankew is the former economic advisor to George W. Bush. So more on the conservative side. So these economic principles are held in common really by economists across the spectrum. When we start out in a principles class, and the economists will know what I'm talking about, we usually start out by saying that economics is the study of the allocation of scarce resources among competing uses. So allocation is just a fancy word for who gets what. So don't worry about that. Scarcity is a very important concept in economics, and I will return to that in just a little bit. Resources for economists, when we're talking at a very general level, we tend to divide them into three types. Land, and land includes the product of land, so coal mined from the ground, or trees harvested in Oregon, or fish removed from the oceans. So land is both physical land and resources. Labor, of course, is human labor, which can be improved through the application of human capital, meaning going to school and getting an education. And then capital is physical and financial capital. So the physical capital would be plant and machinery, and the financial capital is the money you need to keep a business going. So economics is the study of the allocation of scarce resources among competing uses. So what are we going to do with these scarce resources? But let's start out by thinking about why these resources are scarce in the first place. And the reason for that is because another big assumption in economics is that human wants are insatiable. And insatiable just means people cannot satisfy all their wants for goods and services. And that sounds a little depressing and not our finest hour as human beings. But if you think of the number of people in the world who have not been able to meet their basic needs, and then you think of all the people who have but still want more, I think human wants are insatiable is a fairly acceptable assumption to make in economics. So then the scarcity comes from the fact that we want more and more and more. So by definition, resources have to be scarce. I mean, it's true that we can grow more trees, but there's a time component to that. So essentially the scarcity comes from this sort of insatiable human desire to consume more goods and services. So that leads to the second definition of economics, which is that it's the study of choice. If resources are scarce and human wants are insatiable, then we have to make choices. And this is often abbreviated as we have to make a choice about what to produce. That's the first question. The second question is how to produce it. And this is where the engineers come in. We want to produce things as efficiently as possible because resources are scarce and we don't want to waste them. And then finally, who should get the output? So that's really the question that all societies have to answer. And they answer it in various ways. We live in what's called a mixed economy. And a mixed economy is an economy that has a mix of market-based and government-directed decision-making. So we know that the government makes choices on our behalf because they collect taxes from us, and they spend the money on things like national defense, which would be very hard to organize at the individual level. And there's also some redistribution in the form of, say, Medicaid programs or food stamps, where the government allocates money to people who have not been able to generate enough money in the market. And then on the market side, on the market-based resource, distribution questions, it's really a question of a dollar equals a vote. So in the question of what should be produced, people with more dollars have more votes and they get to determine what gets produced. Obviously, they're always looking for a good value, so still want to minimize cost. But there is a strong market component to the U.S. economy. And then this leads to another really interesting thing that in economics, and do read the E1 summary notes because you go into more detail, but the true cost of anything is that which is sacrificed. Because if resources are scarce, anytime we do one thing, we have to not do something else. So if you chose to listen to this video, you could have done something else. That which you sacrificed, you could have watched TV, you could have studied for a different class, or played with your children or your little brothers and sisters. So that which is given up is the true cost, and we call that the opportunity cost. And that also leads to something that is interesting about opportunity cost that we sometimes forget, that is, it is very subjective. So if you asked one person, what was the cost of watching this video? They might say, well, I would have watched TV instead. Someone else might have said, well, I would have studied for my chemistry test. So opportunity cost is subjective. Take a look at E1 summary notes. I got a lot more detail in there. We start out slow in this class. I don't want to frighten people, but it gets a little intense when we start talking about economic equivalence and the time value of money. So enjoy the first week, and I'll see you in the next video.